Hey, what's up, everyone? Soundpath to Freedom. My name is Derrick Broze, and I'm about to give you a presentation that I think I'm calling Exit and Build and Natural Law, Living in Line with Your Principles, which is all about living in alignment. So excited to share this. This is going to be mostly off the top of my head with some projects and some ideas and some concepts I've been toying with for the last decade or so. If you're not familiar with my work, I'll just give you a real quick, brief rundown. As I said, my name is Derrick Broze. I've been an independent journalist for the last 15 years, an activist, documentary filmmaker, author, public speaker, a lot of different hats that I wear. My main website and work can be found at theconsciousresistance.com. It's the Conscious Resistance Network, where I've been producing documentaries and podcasts, and most of my work you can find there at theconsciousresistance.com. I have written for a lot of different websites in the independent media over the years. I currently am a contributor at The Last American Vagabond with Ryan Christian, and about to start writing for Unlimited Hangout with Whitney Webb. I am producing about to conclude a 17-part documentary series called The Pyramid of Power, which you can find at thepyramidofpower.net. And I'm going to be throwing out a bunch of other links and things throughout this presentation, so feel free to take notes or come back and watch later. And much of what I'm going to talk about is going to come out of my book, one of my books called How to Opt Out of the Technocratic State, which you can download the free PDF and audiobook if you want to check it out at theconsciousresistance.com/how-to. You can find it there. It's also, of course, available in physical form if you still like reading physical books. It's in Spanish, English, German, French. And most of what we're going to talk about today is going to be coming from there. So I'll talk more about that. So, okay, let's start with a bit about, I'm going to lay some foundations here. We're going to talk about what I call the conscious resistance, and then we're going to talk about natural law and voluntarism and the way that I've always interpreted these concepts, largely, of course, due to people like Mark Passio and some other researchers and philosophers. And then we're going to talk about what I call exit and build strategy, which is, again, from this book. And then we'll bring those two concepts together, like how natural law and exit and build work together, why I think exit and build strategy is actually a fulfillment of living in natural law, because it's one thing to understand a concept and it's a whole nother to actually live it and breathe it and embody it, which is not always very easy, but I think it's at least a worthy goal. So we're going to talk about that, and then, we'll wrap up and we'll see how long this goes. So I founded the Conscious Resistance in 2013 as a place for my independent journalism, also for my exploration of anarchism and voluntarism and spirituality. I've always been interested in different types of spiritual teachings, whether it's Buddhist or Christian mysticism or other things that really don't have a name. And then the more and more I've learned of my family's own native ancestry, learning of our native traditions and sweat lodge and Sundance and ceremony. And so I wanted a place to explore those ideas, as well as hard-hitting investigative journalism, exploring spirituality and anarchism, freedom, and freedom in the physical sense and in the spiritual sense. So that was the goal in the founding of the Conscious Resistance. But it's also, for me, a deeper concept that ties into the conversation around natural law. And so I tend to describe the conscious resistance as the understanding, the recognition, the realization that the struggle for a more free, ethical, and just world will not come from only confronting physical institutions of power, whether that's governments, corporations, Bill Gates, Klaus Schwab, whatever you want to name. That's an important piece of the puzzle, but it's not the fullest extent of it. So the conscious resistance is understanding that it's not just that physical realm, and it's also not exclusively the spiritual realm or the realm beyond the five senses. So, doing shadow work, getting in tune with yourself, etc. All of these things are valuable and important, prayer, meditation, etc. But if you are completely in that realm and you're totally in the air and you have no foundation, your feet aren't on the ground, well, then there's obviously imbalance there as well. So to me, the conscious resistance is kind of bringing these together, recognizing that to build a better world, we have to do that internal work against and with what I call our internal tyrant, which is your doubts, fears, insecurities, and limiting beliefs, which can prevent you from being the best version of yourself. We have to do that work, as well as in the physical realm, work to expose evil and to expose corruption and to try to build something better. And bringing those two things together, those two sides of the same coin, is what I call the conscious resistance. So it's, you could dumb it down if you wanted and say spiritual anarchism. Sometimes I've also called it holistic anarchism, which is another concept I write in my book. And it's basically the same thing. It's that, like, freedom and anarchism and rejecting authority and false authority and all these different concepts. It's one thing to do it in the physical, but it's quite another to do it in the internal, in the spiritual, and the mental world. But those are both valuable and important. So I focus a lot on that, whether it's through my journalism, my activism, public speaking, etc. But that is a core value that I believe in my work, and I'll share really briefly where that comes from, my personal experience on that. I am 40 years old this year. 20 years ago this year, I got arrested for possession of crystal meth. I was addicted to drugs for about 2 years right after high school, spent a lot of time drinking and getting into drugs and going down this whole path in a criminal underworld, and got arrested the week before I turned 21. And of course, the prison system didn't save me by any means, because it's a horrible institution that has no redeeming value and is not rehabilitative. But ultimately, I had to make some personal decisions and choices within that institution to decide to change my life. And so when I got arrested, I had to do that. I ended up doing 18 months in Texas state institutions. And the first time I got locked up, after I realized I wasn't going to get out for at least a year, I started to journal. I started to write my thoughts down and my ideas, and to try to understand why I had been abusing drugs and going down this road. I also was lucky enough to have a very, very, very supportive grandmother who is my spiritual influence. And she started sending me books about meditation and prayer, which was very new to me at the time, because I, like many of us, rejected religion and rejected everything associated with what we might call God. So this is the first time I kind of opened up to that idea. So I share all that to say that when I got locked up and I got through it and eventually got into the activism things I do today, that was my first real awakening. I had to kind of crack myself open and start doing that deeper spiritual work well before I started researching conspiracy theories or, getting into independent journalism. And then eventually that led me to, through my activism, to seeing that there were two sides of this coin. As I was saying, I had the activist side, let's go out and protest, raise awareness, spread information, do that important, great work. But also I had a foundation of doing the internal work and, working on my healing process. And so I could see right away that these were both important. But unfortunately, in the beginning of my journey, that most of the activists that I was interacting with were very atheist, left brain, rational thinkers. There's nothing wrong with that. But because of that, they were just not interested in the spiritual things that I was interested in when I got out of prison and got into activism. So for about 2 years, I had two worlds. I was living a double life. I had activist friends who would go to end the Fed protests and street actions and do this sort of thing. And then I had spiritual friends who did consciousness events and meditations and things of this sort. And neither group seemed to believe they had anything in common. When I would talk to my spiritual friends and invite them to the latest protest of police injustice or something, they'd say, don't talk about the bad things, only good vibes here, and, cover their eyes and cover their ears, like that type of spirituality, which might be called by people like Mark New Age bullshit, right? Like trying to reject reality and just, ignore it. That doesn't help anything, right? So a lot of my spiritual friends were doing that, though. They were like, no, we don't want to talk about that. So, okay, I'll leave you alone. And I talked to my activist friends and I try to invite them to spiritual events and to have these deeper conversations. And many of them were like, what are you talking about, hippie? Are you high? And I was high, but that wasn't really relevant. The point is that I was trying to get them to understand these different viewpoints, and neither group could see that they were sort of a missing piece of the puzzle. So I hope I'm making sense here. Like that, the idea to me, though, is it's very foundational to understand that the spiritual work is just as important as the physical work. I don't think we should overemphasize one over the other. And I think sometimes we get out of balance, and including myself, we might go so hard in the physical realm because the world is full of injustice and there's genocide and there's violence and there's crime and there's just so much to deal with that we get so pulled into that and we stop taking care of our spiritual self, right? Or maybe other times we recede inwards and we do the spiritual work, which is important, but we maybe start to do that to the detriment of paying attention to the physical world that also exists around us. So bringing these two things together is, I think, absolutely vital and important. And that's what I call the conscious resistance. All right, so let's talk about natural law and voluntarism. I don't want to go too dirty and nerdy and weird with it, but natural law is a concept that's been around for hundreds of years, before the internet existed, before even I'd say the modern variations of this concept, including those put forth by Mark. You can find anarchist theorists like Lysander Spooner and Benjamin Tucker talking about natural law. They didn't necessarily use it in the same context we might be using it today, but this idea has been around, that there is some sort of unwritten, universal, unspoken law, for lack of a better term, that exists, that is real and tangible, and as real as this desk right here in front of me, and that has impact on us as humans. And of course, there's debates about whether this is just a figment of our imagination. In fact, actually, if you go back to some of the earliest anarchist philosophical debates in the United States, the Boston anarchists, as they call them, the debates over natural law were some of the most divisive because they each had a different reason for believing in anarchism. Some of them had more pragmatic beliefs, like, well, the government's inefficient, so people would do better to rule themselves. You know, they're coming from different places. And natural law as sort of the foundation, saying like, well, this is just the natural law. This is the way things are intended to be. This is God's way. However you want to phrase that, was a controversial idea to a lot of people who didn't think it necessarily was philosophically sound. So I say all that just to say that it's interesting because the debates around this concept and these words have been going on for over 200 years. And, you know, since people have thought of this concept, the way I tend to view natural law and the way I think it ties into the philosophy of voluntarism, we're going to talk about both those concepts, is that for me, natural law is a concept, a thing, if we can call it such, that does exist in a real, objective, tangible way, although a lot of people would argue it's subjective, right? And that does impact us as human beings on an energetic and spiritual level. Like and it's a very cumbersome way to describe it, but I'll go further. To me, it is understanding that actions have consequences, and that when you violate the sovereignty of another being, and I think I would include animals in this, and I know that's even another debate as well, but if you, let's just stick with humans for now. If you violate the sovereignty of another human being by initiating force, fraud, violence, coercion, etc., against this person, which Mark has a discussion that he's shared before about the natural law sins, you know, and the real seven deadly sins. So when you do those things and you violate that sovereignty of another person, there might not be an immediate physical repercussion that somebody can see, right? Like maybe somebody does do harm, they rob somebody, they rape them, they do something in violation of that person's sovereignty. Maybe they don't get caught. Maybe it doesn't seem like there's immediate physical consequences. This is why some people would say, oh, it's not objective because I can come punch you in the face and nothing's going to happen to me. But I think even if that is true and there's no immediate visible physical repercussions for violations of natural law, that there is a spiritual repercussion. And that might not be seen immediately. And I don't even claim to fully understand that concept as I'm sharing it here, but that's how I tend to view this. And the reason this ties into voluntarism is because the philosophy of voluntarism, which also has been around since the 1800s, this phrase, and it's been used in different ways. But the way I'm describing it, like in the modern voluntarist, is again, the idea that all relationships should be voluntary and consensual between human beings and all relationships. And that seems pretty obvious to some people. We're like, yeah, of course, like relationships are voluntary. I don't feel like I'm in any involuntary relationships. But when you take this concept and you apply it to your friends, your family, you could say, well, I'm voluntarily choosing to go to work every day, right? That's a consensual relationship. But the one place you find that it is involuntary, or at least one of the biggest places you find that, is with the government. Because if you try to not pay taxes, then they can use their men with guns to come to your house and try to, garnish your wages. And if you keep avoiding them, eventually they're going to put you in a cage, right? There's violence behind that. And it's not a relationship that I think many people would voluntarily choose to be in. That's why there's all kinds of people around the world who complain about taxes. Why do you think this phrase, there's only things consistent in life is death and taxes? Not only is that part of programming, but also it's because a lot of people have accepted that even if they hate taxes and they want to complain, oh, the dang IRS, at the end of the day, they're going to pay. Because they know that it is an involuntary relationship, that there is an implicit threat of violence, and if they don't participate, there will be consequences. So there's no way to argue that that is a voluntary consensual relationship. So that's why most people who consider themselves voluntarists consider voluntarism to just be another word for anarchism, because we reject government as legitimate. So those, to me, natural law and voluntarism, we're using maybe similar and different words to describe same concepts. Voluntarists want all relationships to be voluntary, and that's only one aspect, okay? So if every relationship I interact with is voluntary, like right now, everybody who's choosing to tune into this, you could tune out at any moment and sever this relationship. But if not, you're choosing to be here, nobody's got a gun to your head, you're of your own volition and saying, I want to be here right now and engage with this person or hear this idea, right? That's voluntary. But if we continue to apply that concept to every person, not only understanding that government is violence and that government is an involuntary relationship, but if we extend this recognition that, hey, I am a beautiful, powerful, free, sovereign being, and so is everybody else around me. And so if I want my sovereignty to be respected and I don't want to be violated with force, fraud, or coercion, then I need to extend that to every other being, right? To me, that is just natural law in action. We're recognizing it about ourselves. We're choosing to act and operate with our relationships in that way. So that's a little bit about my views on natural law and voluntarism. Now I want to talk to you guys about this concept of exit and build. And then after this, we're going to bring the two ideas together. And I think it'll be perfectly clear by the end of this what I'm describing here. And if you're enjoying Soundpath, give us thumbs up and comments and share and tell your friends and come hang out in person tomorrow. Do it. You'll enjoy yourself. Okay, so exit and build, as I mentioned, is from my book, How to Opt Out of the Technocratic State. I originally wrote this book in 2020, published January 31st, 2020, which is a weird time to publish a book, right before COVID happened. And unfortunately, a lot of the things I described in this book, which I thought we had more time to sort of prepare for, happened during COVID. So in 2022, I wrote an updated edition, and there's 5 new chapters that we added that cover everything we learned from lockdowns, travel restrictions. And what this book focuses on, part of it is a how-to guide, as the title implies, how to opt out of the technocratic state. It's also part history, where I outline the history of the original technocracy movement and the role that it played in the United States and Canada, and how this later transformed in the 70s to what Zbigniew Brzezinski, if you guys know his name, he's a deep state agent who advised every president since Jimmy Carter to Obama. He wrote a book in the 1970s called Between the Technotronic Era, America Between Two Ages, and he described technocracy, but he turned the term to technotronic. Either way, he described essentially a worldwide police state where there was a loss of freedom, individual liberties, and privacy in the name of building some alleged utopia. That's what they describe. And I was warning in this book that I believe that this philosophy is actually guiding where we're at. I think right now, and sitting here in late August 2025, that sounds pretty obvious to a lot of people. It's crazy to think just 5 years ago, though, a lot less people knew about technocracy than do now. So I think on some fronts we are winning because awareness is rising about people like Peter Thiel, Palantir, these kind of connections. And then people finally understanding that Donald Trump is not the freaking hero they thought he was. There's still work to do, but when I was writing this, there was a lot less awareness just 5 years ago about what technocracy was. So it's pretty cool. Things are progressing in that front. Unfortunately, their agendas are also progressing quite well. So it's part history with technocracy. And then I also do a little bit of a history into the philosophy strategy of agorism, which I'm not going to get well, I guess I got time to at least explain it a little bit. And then because really my ideas are built upon agorism, I'm just trying not to be too nerdy here, guys, and just get into the how-to stuff, but I hope those of you out there are enjoying it. And so it's part history about technocracy, part history about agorism, and then the majority of it is, okay, well, what do I actually do about it, right? And this is where, to me, the most important stuff matters. This is the bulk of what I want to communicate, because I've been really hammering this point the last few years that I don't think, if it ever was, but I don't think it's currently enough to be awake, aware, conscious, whatever the heck terms we want to use to pretend like we're more enlightened than everybody else. I don't think that's enough anymore, because there's been a mass awakening to a large degree. There's a lot of people who are falling for garbage like QAnon and stuff like that, but there's a lot more people who are questioning the world than they were 10 years ago, 15 years ago, 20 years ago. Obviously the internet played a great role in that. But has awareness changed anything? Not necessarily. A lot of people are awake. They're watching podcasts all day. They're watching documentaries. They're consuming content. They're creating content. But that, I think, is not the end goal. What are we going to do? Just make podcasts as we watch the world collapse, and at least we can all talk about it to each other on podcasts? I'm not saying there's not value in doing that, but I think it's the awakening has got to a certain point where we've sort of hit this comfortable place, and being comfortable can sometimes turn into complacency, and complacency, apathy breeds death in the long term, spiritual death, physical death. So I think we need to go beyond just being awake and being activated. And what I mean by that's what we're going to talk about now, is actively working on building the better world that you believe is possible for yourself, for your children, for their children's children, for the coming 7 generations and beyond, that really matter. And also to honor your ancestors, that no matter what part of this planet you came from, what color skin you have, what language you speak. Every single one of our ancestors had to go through blood, sweat, and tears to get us to be where we are right now today in this moment, and all the struggles that we went through and that they went through. And so for me, a lot of what I do and what I'm about to communicate to you is something I take very seriously, because I feel like the fulfillment of this and choosing to live in alignment with your values and principles and with natural law is what we're here to do. That this is why we're existing on this planet. So to be the generation to say, like, we're going to actually live this example, right? And we're going to set that example for the coming generations, because if we don't, we can all see what's on the horizon, right? We can look up, this is what I mean, is like, there's a million podcasts out there right now that can tell you about technocracy, can tell you about the police state and all the stuff going on. And it's important to be somewhat aware, but ultimately, if you do nothing with that information, then what value is it really doing, right? And how are you any different than a sheeple who doesn't know anything, and so obviously doesn't do anything? Okay, great, but what are you doing with that information, right? So I just want to throw that little rant out there, that I think we need more action ultimately, and that's where I really think that the quote unquote movements should be focused on is, okay, well, now that we get this shit, now that we know the world's crazy and there's people doing all these things and we understand these different principles, what does it take to actually live them and to embody them and to set an example? Because as far as I've seen in my work and my short time doing this, people learn by what they can see. You can talk all day, but when people see you in action and they can not only learn by visibly seeing with their eyes and their brain learns, oh my God, that's possible. That person was like me and now they're doing this. They've taken this step. They've made this big move and they're actually pushing themselves to embody that principle. Maybe that could be me, right? That's how we teach each other. That's how we continue to grow. So agorism, or more correctly known as agorism, depending on your accent, you might say it differently, but it was a philosophy, an anarchist philosophy that was discovered by a man called Samuel Konkin III, who was a Canadian dude, very active in the student movements in the US and Canada in the 60s and 70s. And he was there at the beginning before the US Libertarian Party was formed in 1971, when it was essentially an anarchist movement. And in fact, he was one of the biggest critics throughout his life of the Libertarian Party, because he said it was a selling out of the original student anarchist movement that had formed at that time in the US and Canada. And so he's got a really whole interesting story, but he started studying, he's a student of history, studying the Russian Revolution, the French Revolution, American Revolution. He's seeing this movement he was a part of, questioning authority, decide to turn into a political party and seeing that as a total selling out of principles. And so he starts thinking, if voting's not the answer, and politics isn't the answer, and violence isn't the answer, because we know that's a dead end. We talked about the initiation of violence. That's not the solution. If you reject both those solutions, politics and violence, we're not going to storm the Capitol, and we're not going to vote for the rest of our lives and think that it's going to solve all our problems. Then what are you left with? A lot of people would say apathy, black pilled, right? Like, just give up, doomer. There's nothing to do. We're screwed. I reject that wholeheartedly, and I would assume most people hearing this would as well. So then what else are you left with? Konkin believed that there was kind of like a middle path that you could do. And what he did is he started to study these different revolutions, as well as the collapse of the Soviet Union and other kind of what are often called informal economies. Like, for example, in parts of Mexico, India, much of what they call the global south, there's people who are unbanked, who deal only in cash. These are informal markets or underground economies, or counter economies, as he liked to call them, where governments have no idea how much money is actually made in that, don't tax the people there involved, and get nothing from it, right? So he realized there's this entire $1 trillion economy that exists outside of the state's hands. And he sort of imagined what would happen if you were able to activate those people and to raise their consciousness to just see that there's strength outside of the system. And this is something that's increasingly important in our time with technocracy on the rise, is so much of the agenda is about telling people, like the poor Indian farmer or the Mexican person that lives in a rural mountainside, that there is strength in being in the system. We need you to get a digital ID. We need you to have a bank account so you can be a real person, right? They're trying to sell them on the dream to join and be a part of the system. But what Konkin was really seeing is that there's strength outside of the system. But all those millions of people who are making trillions of dollars in the counter economy in the world, they're not necessarily anarchists. They're just doing what they have to do to survive. And what he believed is if you were able to consciously help people see the value in this, and people chose, like even people who currently exist in what he called the white market. This is the mainstream economy where everything you do is tax traced. You're paying, taxes to the IRS, et cetera. That's where most people live, in that white market. But if you were to shift to the black and gray market, black market simply meaning things that are illegal that the state considers to be illegal. But since he was also a voluntarist, this wouldn't involve murder, obviously robbing people. People think black market, they think like mafia. He just meant purely activity that the government says is not legal, but you could choose to do anyways. Let's say like in a state where weed is illegal and you choose to say, hey, I'm still going to do that. I'm going to provide a service to people and make untaxed money. He saw that as a strength, that you're taking power. And every time a person made money outside the state's hands and took away that tax revenue, it was one less bomb they could build. It was one less, spying on someone, one less dollar they could send to fucking Israel, taking strength away from them by depriving and starving the beast, basically, is what it came down to. And so his whole ideas go much, much deeper, but that's essentially the bulk of what he talked about, is how do we start building this counter economy, this underground economy, and consciously getting people to use tools outside of the government's hands. And when he was talking about this was the 70s, 80s. He unfortunately died in 2004. So a lot of the tools that we have available to us now didn't even exist, but what he was talking about, the potential for existing outside the system, I think is much, much more possible now. So in my book, I kind of provide that history of his work. And then I talk about why I think one of the solutions is what I call exit and build. I essentially say that there's three options you have. And one of them we've already thrown off the table. And that's what I call apathy is death. Everybody hearing this right now who knows the direction the world's headed in could choose to say, you know what, I see what's happening, but I'm comfortable. I'm chilling. I've got my family. I've got my kids. I'm just going to worry about that. Screw the future. That's the most I can handle. And that's your right to do so. But by choosing to do that, by choosing to and not act on what's coming, again, I believe that's a spiritual death, by choosing that apathy and choosing that complacency. But also, as I said earlier, you're selling out your ancestors. And I think you're also selling out the future generations who are 100% depending on us. The world that they're going to be born into is 100%, without a doubt, dependent on the actions we choose to take or do not take. And that will decide what those coming after us are going to have. Will there be some other option to exist outside of this technocratic state that we see these psychopaths are building? Will there be an option? Will we be able to prevent that from happening? It all depends on us. If we simply just continue to watch the show and watch it like it's conspiratainment, infotainment, this is funny, watching the end of the world through podcasts, then we shouldn't expect anything different except for it to happen. We will allow that to be fulfilled. But if we choose to consciously live in line with natural law and be an example to other people, then I think there's a chance. So besides choosing apathy as death, another option that I talk about in this book in terms of like the encroaching technocratic surveillance state is what I call hold down the fort. And this is just a really simple concept that everybody can understand. We saw this during COVID, as well as exit and build happened during COVID. Maybe you're the kind of person that you're like, I see what's happening, but Pennsylvania is my home and I'm going to, stay here till I die. So I'm going to plant my feet here. I'm not going to go anywhere else. I'm not going to quote unquote run away. Like, I'm committed to trying to help my area. Then great. If you feel like where you're at now, whether it's your home or original home or adopted home, is where you want to be, then give everything you got. Then do everything you can to wake up that area. Get involved on like a local level. I don't even mean politics. I mean just start to communicate, network with other activists, use websites like the Freedom Cells website, freedomcells.org, or I know Alex X got the Way Forward that allows people to search and find people locally too. There's tools like this as well, or just even use Facebook, find people on the local level, get connected, start working to see what can you do to prevent that police state, that technocratic state from coming? What can you do to start becoming independent of those systems, right? So if you feel like home is where you're at now, that's what I would call hold down the fort. Like you're committed to building this, holding down, freedom in your area. Now, for other people, like during COVID, a lot of people realized I live in a tyrannical place. I don't want to live here anymore. So people were moving from California to Texas or New York to Idaho or Florida, whatever. Or maybe they just moved a town over or a state over. I moved to Mexico, partially because of COVID, but also I just knew I wanted to be there. But my point is, that's an example of exit and build. This idea it's sort of a two-part concept. One concept specifically deals with physical location, like I'm describing now. So in the face of tyranny during COVID, a lot of people figured, I don't want to hold down the fort in this place. This place is now becoming tyrannical. I've lived here my whole life, but I can't believe people are acting like this. But I can see 30 minutes away, there's a lot more activists and like-minded people. I think I'd be better of use to there. I'm going to exit from this current location and go build in this new location. So in that sense, exit and build can apply to physical location. Another way to think about it is a lot of people are trying to get out of the smart cities because of everything we know that they're capable of, increasing surveillance and loss of bodily autonomy. And so they're exiting from the big cities and going to the suburbs or to the rural area, trying to get a little bit further out, maybe getting a piece of land. Like that's also a part of this exit and build concept. So those are two examples that specifically deal with physical location, moving from one location that is, you don't think the future for liberties there is good. So you want to pick up and move somewhere where there's greener pastures, so to speak, and maybe getting out of a big city to a more rural area and trying to get land. That's all part of exit and build. What I want to focus on now for the rest of the talk is exit and build, which is more a philosophical and strategic concept and strategy. And so it's very similar to what people think of when they hear the phrase vote with your dollar. Like probably most people, when they hear that, obviously you think about dollars, money. So you think like, okay, I don't like who Walmart invests in or partners in or their business practices or whatever. So I'm not going to give them my dollars. I'm going to vote with my dollar and choose to support the local mom and pop shop, right? That's a simple concept we can all understand. But again, we tend to strictly keep that about economic matters. So like you support companies you do like, you don't support companies you don't like. You invest in companies you think have similar values, and you divest from companies who don't have similar values, right? But if you take this concept and apply it to every area of your life, not just your finances, this is what I call exit and build. So in one way, exit and build is the vote with your dollar, but applied in a holistic manner. I like to think in terms of holistic. I said earlier about sometimes I call my work holistic anarchism. And all holistic means, that original concept is to think in whole systems, right? And so instead of, if we were talking about like a holistic environmental science, just as one example, you would be studying all of the different Earth's systems. You'd be looking at the land, you'd be looking at the water, you'd be factoring a whole bunch of different things because you're looking at the whole picture, instead of, say, maybe you're just studying just the bodies of water or just the mountains and things like that, right? So that's one way to think about it. So to me, holistic activism, holistic anarchism, exit and build, voting with your dollar in a holistic way, it just means applying these values to as many areas of your life as you can do so. Today, I'm going to give you 3 examples, but you could literally go on endlessly for this. And I actually have another book that you can download at my website. It's called The Holistic Self-Assessment, and it's part of this concept. It's a process I put myself through when I was in prison, and sort of as a way to get to know yourself better, but then also to look at what are the values that and the principles that are guiding your actions. Are your habits in line with those values and principles and actions? And when you see disalignment, you can then make appropriate changes, right? So if you're able to do that and say, okay, I have my finances, I have my food. We're going to talk about money and food, technology. You could also say, what was the other one? Relationships is I think a big key one. But you just start to look at all these different areas, these spheres of influence in your life, and see how you can improve those in terms of living in line with your principles. So I'll give a couple examples. Maybe you're working a job that doesn't align at all with the values that you claim to believe in. And if you say you believe in them, that's great. But it's one thing to believe in something, and it's a whole nother thing to actually practice it, right? So you can say, I believe in natural law, I'm an anarchist, or I don't support violence. And maybe in direct ways you don't support violence, but maybe in your stock portfolio you're invested in companies that are profiting from violence or from war, right? Or you're working for a company that directly supports violence in some different way, right? The violence might be subtle, it might be indirect, and it might not be through your hand, but that doesn't mean you aren't playing a role and choosing to participate. And we have to also understand that this entire evil system that is being constructed around us absolutely requires our consent, and especially when it comes to a spiritual plane. So by participating in evil, you consent to it, and you make yourself, like an accessory to it in one way. So if you want to actually live in line with those values, then you maybe would say, like, for example, a lot of people chose to quit their jobs during COVID. I've met people over the years who came and, shared their stories with me and said that they used to work for the Department of Defense, and they ultimately realized this wasn't in line with their values and that they struggled with it for a long time. Eventually, they get to a place where they decide living in line with those values is worth feeling good when I wake up in the morning, being in line with my spiritual self, even if I don't know where the next check's coming, even if I'm not certain how I'm going to make it through. I need to live in line with that. So that's what we're aiming for. It's not perfection, and it's not easy. The other thing is everything I'm going to share a little bit more of today, and this whole exit and build idea. It's not a pay $5.99 a month and here's your 10-step process to solve the New World Order or something like that. Anybody trying to sell you stuff like that is full of it. Actual real change and living it takes time. It takes sometimes changing your habits. It can take changing your relationships. It can take financial investment, right? living in line with your values is not as we live in, unfortunately, in an imperfect world, and it's much easier to live and against your principles and against your values because of the things that are convenient around us than it is to strive to be in alignment. So I'm not here to say any of it's easy. I just want to offer that. But let's start talking about money first. So everybody here is probably familiar with the fractional reserve banking system, the Federal Reserve, debt-based money, all this sort of stuff. We can go on and on. There's plenty of great documentaries about it. We see the flaws in that system. We see that it devalues our currency through inflation. It's stealing from people. You could talk about the 2007, 2008 financial crisis and how the banks involved in the system robbed the American people and plenty of people around the world as well. And then were bailed out with your money even further through the government. There's plenty of reasons to be opposed to these systems and to not want to participate and or support in them. But in reality, as I said a moment ago, it's extremely convenient to do so. There are some of the most enlightened people I know and most educated, informed people I know who still currently have their money in Bank of America, which robbed the American people in 2008. Or maybe they're using Chase Bank, which helped Jeffrey Epstein launder his victims' money. Or maybe they're using HSBC, which helped with drug trafficking. Or maybe they're helping with, we could go on, right? And this is not a judgment of anybody. This is just the reality. And if anything rises in your chest, sit with it and think about how that feels. And is there a way to change that? My point is that there's a lot of great people who understand these values and principles, but when it comes to our actions, we're out of alignment, and that there's no other way to say it. We're out of alignment. And I'm not sitting here saying this is like I'm perfectly, got this all figured out. Like I said, our world is imperfect. But if we don't even take concrete steps to try to get in the direction, to at least be aiming in the direction that we want, instead we just say, well, the world's complicated and messy, so I'm not even going to bother. So it is what it is. I don't think that's enough. I think we're better than that. And I think, again, that the time is calling for us to step up to the plate and rise to the occasion. So there's plenty of reasons to seek alternatives to the financial system, to exit from that system and to build alternatives. Now, we could think of a number of different alternatives like barter networks. You've got work trades, you've got time banking, all kinds of stuff. And then obviously a more controversial topic like crypto, which some people are completely against and others have used like a tool. I have reported on the dangers and the concerns around crypto and Bitcoin specifically for years. I've also been attending Bitcoin conferences since 2014 to understand it as a journalist. I got my first Bitcoin transaction in 2013, and I didn't keep any of that. This was when it was like worth $2 or something. And the reason I believed in it in the beginning and felt like it was a tool is for the very potential for it to be a revolutionary, non-government, yes, digital, but I don't think everything digital is automatically bad, but a private non-government currency that could be sent anywhere in seconds with very little to no fees. I love silver, I love gold, I love precious metals, but you can't walk across a border with a whole bunch of gold bars. You can't walk across a border with more than $10,000, but I could walk across a border with $10 million worth of Bitcoin or Monero and a USB drive or a phone, and they'd never know the difference, right? So there's some benefits to it, but I'm not like a maxi for anything. I'll use any alternative that works and is, not violating my values. But I will say just briefly on the crypto piece, I think people who have been either afraid of it or not understanding of it, which there's plenty of things to not understand, or who reject it wholeheartedly because they don't, again, there's fear or they're just like, it's a new world order currency, that's fine. All I know is that for the last 10 years, 13 years, going on 13 years since I was introduced to Bitcoin, I've been able to use Bitcoin and Monero to avoid the government, to avoid the banks, to move money around that Uncle Sam hasn't seen any of it all. That's all I'll say, right? Like, there's a tool that's available. Will it be available forever? It definitely doesn't look like that. They're clamping down on private cryptos like Monero. There's a reason they're trying to make it difficult for people to use certain tools, and they're trying to shut down all the access to them because they understand that they can't completely control all of them. But I am very skeptical of stablecoins and the Bitcoin in its current state and all this kind of stuff. My point to say is that there are tools available to us. It's up to you to choose what you prefer. If you're like icky, Bitcoin, crypto, digital, I don't want to touch it, then start, create your own local currency, get into the precious metal market, figure out what alternatives do exist for you. And then in terms of the mainstream banking system, at best, or at least, switch to a local credit union. If you're in the US, credit unions exist. Some other countries that might be tuned in, there's usually similar institutions. If you look like trust banks, local credit unions, things like that, these are smaller, still in the banking system, still in the fractional reserve, Federal Reserve, et cetera. So it's a step in the right direction. And this is the other thing is when I talk about exit and build, You might be in a place where you're like, look, Derrick, I got $20,000 worth of student loan debt. I got credit card debt. I got all this stuff. This sounds so far away. Like, I'm overwhelmed. Okay, well, take the first step. Switch to a local credit union. It literally will cost you nothing but time to move your money from this horrible banking institution that doesn't value you and has been involved with a number of different things. No matter what it is, no matter what bank you have, I feel confident we could find something about them. You can move your money from them and exit from that system, take away your moral and physical and financial support from them, and put it into a local institution. That isn't perfect, but that at least gives you more say in your money, because credit unions, the way they tend to operate, you actually can sometimes vote on how they use that money in your own community, the money that you're hosting there. And then I'd say that's not the final destination, but at least that's a step towards getting in line with your values, because that's what I'm talking about, is how do we live in alignment with our values? You're taking this holistic self-assessment and you're like, okay, when it comes to my finances, yeah, I've got some stocks and some companies. Shit, I've got Palantir stock. Okay, I can get rid of that. That's a real quick thing. Okay, well, I've got this student loan debt. That's going to take some while to pay off. Start coming up with a plan. Like, what are the steps you can take to make yourselves more independent and more free of these systems? But not only that, again, more in alignment with your values, because if you believe in natural law and voluntarism, participating in these systems is working against your goals. You're working against your own spiritual like, I don't even know how to put it other than like it's something that is a part of you. You're working against yourself, against your own spirit, essentially, by participating in these systems. Evil, again, has to get us to consent. And the more we consent, the more we participate in it, we are allowing them to pull us down to their level. But if we rise above that and we take the sometimes difficult, again, not easy road of living in alignment with your values, you will reap the reward for it, spiritually and otherwise. Let's talk about food and exit and build. So what I'm doing is describing the problems and then, what are the options we have? So the problems with the current food system: wasteful, destructive, factory farms. It's just not sustainable in terms of distribution. Like it could break down at any moment. Environmental damage. You don't have to be a climate change freak to see the problems with the modern food system. Like you can, reject that and still see that there's problems associated with these systems. So the current food systems, they're inefficient, they're unsustainable, they're wasteful, they're destructive, they're harmful. That's not something I want to be a part of. That's not something I want to participate in. This is something that I think most people are already striving for. Is like, okay, so how do I vote with my dollar? How do I exit and build? Okay, well, I'm going to stop supporting farms that raise their animals in this particular way, or I'm going to stop supporting this company because they mistreat their employees in this way. Whatever your principles or values are, you start looking at your food from that direction. And again, this is another big spiritual component. What you consume, whether a dead animal or a fruit or a veggie that came from the earth, you're eating that energy and that's becoming a part of you, right? So this is another big part of it. So how do you exit from those systems that don't align with your values? One way, which is not the easiest way, is to grow as much of your own food as possible. This is very unrealistic for a lot of people. I think it's possible, but it's very unrealistic, I've realized over the years, for most people. It is possible. I guarantee you, wherever you live, there's probably at least one local community farm, community garden, urban farm, organic spot. If you're really committed to learning, go volunteer once on the weekend. Put in a couple hours. Like, I don't know, I fell in love with doing this as an activist, putting my hands in the dirt. And every day I went and spent a couple hours there. I learned some new things, and I got to go home with a bunch of like produce that I didn't have to pay for because I just put in some time. And I'm learning through that process, right? So there's things like that. Take a permaculture course, watch a permaculture documentary. Like, there's solutions about how we can not only reject and exit from those unsustainable systems, but then start building new systems. And if you're somebody who's like, look, I'm not a green thumb, that's just not interesting to me, I don't have the time, then at least support the local farmers who do have the time and who are making that effort. Go to places like farmers markets. They might not be 100% aligned on every single belief you have, but go there to talk to people. Maybe pass out flyers about natural law. Talk to people who are already growing their food. Go to visit the farmers directly. Get to visit the farm if you can. Make direct contact and support those kind of people, right? So this is a way we get closer to our food system. We're exiting from one system that we know is shit, and we're building or supporting those who are building. And that's kind of the other aspect, is maybe you're not going to be the farmer necessarily, but support those who are doing the building, right? So this is another way you pull yourself, your time, your money, your spirit away from a system that isn't aligned with natural law or voluntarism, or I'm sure just your general principles, and start building and putting energy into that you do want to see. Another one would be technology. This is, I think, a really important one. And again, another one that's often overlooked by some really amazing people who make exceptions for one reason or another. And again, not a judgment, an acknowledgement that the world is imperfect, and yet an invitation for us to do better. Why are there so many amazing people who host events or podcasts and do things, and their entire thing is on Microsoft Teams, Google Documents, Google, like companies that, again, I don't think if we stopped and looked at what they invest in and what they take, the actions they take, that we would say are aligned with our values. I think most of us would be like, no, I don't support Google and this action here, or them funding this AI project here, or them censoring the internet in China for the people over there. Or we could go on, right? There's a lot of reasons we can understand that the big tech companies, especially with their connections to intelligence agencies, their seed funding from the CIA via In-Q-Tel and on and on and on. These are not things we want to support. They're convenient. They're easy, they're everywhere. But if we reject the mainstream in one sense, then perhaps we should start looking beyond the mainstream technology as well. Thankfully, in 2025, there are a lot more companies who do offer alternatives, and there are all kinds of tools. Now, one thing I'll say before I start sharing some names of some tools and things to check out, we should, of course, understand that probably nothing we can do digital, even in encrypted messaging apps, is truly, truly uncrackable, untraceable. Nobody can ever get into it, especially in the age of quantum computing and things of that sort. And just understanding that governments and intelligence agencies are much further ahead than what we are publicly seeing. So always remember that. If you have something private to communicate, I wouldn't trust any encrypted email, encrypted messenger. I would just say it in person with no phones or computers in the room. So exercise caution. With that said, there still are tips and tools that we can use to not only pull ourselves out of that big tech ecosystem, exit from that system, and build the alternative system. So you could talk about the operating systems itself and start exploring things like Linux. And there's a whole bunch of different versions of Linux that exist out there, open source versions, and people creating experiences that look exactly like Microsoft, if that's what you're comfortable with, or Apple or whatever. So we could talk about operating systems. You could talk about browsers. Obviously, people know about, I think Brave is one of the first ones to get really big, but I wouldn't trust them as maybe much as we might have in the beginning. There's ones like LibreWolf. There's all kinds of, you can find privacy browsers that block everything, block all the trackers, right? There's, like I said, encrypted emails. There's essentially an alternative to every single mainstream big tech tool you're using already exists. It's just that you're not going to find it when you go to the local electronics store, right? You walk in an electronics store, you want to buy a new laptop. What are you going to find? Microsoft built into most of the systems, Google Chromebooks, Apple, Amazon, it's already built in. They've got a monopoly, right? So to find the tools that will actually protect your privacy, you have to look for them. I'm going to mention a couple of websites which are good starting points for some of these tools. Privacytools.io. Privacytools.io. That's one of them. And I'm not affiliated with or paid by any of these. These are just resources I found over the years that are pretty good to, like, it'll go like email. Here's a bunch of alternative emails. Here's a bunch of different browsers. But again, do your own homework, do your own research, see what fits best for you. Privacytools.io. And then somebody contacted me recently and told me about another one that they created that's called libertytools.io. Similar kind of concept. And then nomoregoogle.com. It's another one that just literally lists all these different Google alternatives. A friend's website, Hakeem Anwar, who also is with the company Above Phone, they sell de-Googled privacy phones that come equipped with all the privacy alternatives. So instead of Google Maps, you got Organic Maps or Magic Earth. All these tools already exist. You just need to know that they're out there. And the cool thing that I like about the Above Phone, I don't have a phone at all, but my partner Miriam does, and she uses it. And these open source versions of the apps, they're often way better than the mainstream one you're using. Like, so you can use like a NewPipe and a few others where you can watch YouTube videos, Bandcamp, SoundCloud, etc., all in one app, and you can actually download them with no ads. And like, you can actually own the music or whatever instead of paying for streaming forever. Anyway, so abovephone.com, that's a cool tool if you want to look at alternatives, open source privacy phones and laptops. And then also Hakeem runs the website takebackourtech.org, which is another great resource for like switching over to Linux and things like that. And the company that I use, that, again, not a paid advertisement, just what I use for all of my organizing needs, like when I organize events and stuff like that and do a lot of my writing, is called CryptPad. So CryptPad, the instance I use is cryptpad.fr, and CryptPad has everything that you're doing with Google Docs. It's got sheets, it's got notes, it's got, everything. Like, so you can literally, if you chose to, abandon these companies, exit from them, and support better companies, privacy companies. Now, of course, you got to always be adaptable because, as we know, companies get bought, they might sell out, whatever. You got to pay attention to these things. But if you're aiming to live in line with your values, there's plenty of opportunity when it comes to technology. This is in fact, I think one of the areas where we can have the most immediate impact. Right now, you could just choose to say, like, I'm going to stop using Google Maps. I'm going to learn this organic maps or Magic Earth. And it's going to come with a slight learning curve because we're also programmed that we would think, we're just so used to how a Google Maps looks or an Apple map or whatever you're using that it can take a little bit to adjust to it. But I have people sometimes complain. It's like, yeah, I hear you, man, but man, I have my whole life on Gmail, or I've got all my contacts and we're all on Google Docs together and this and that. And I get it. I'm not saying, again, that it's going to be easy or that it's going to happen overnight. But really, if the bar is, oh no, I got to move a bunch of emails, then maybe, I don't know, maybe you actually don't want to live in line with your values. Like if that's enough to prevent you from like, oh, dang, it's going to take me a couple hours to switch over, or me, I give up, then maybe reevaluate that. Because if you actually do want to live in line with your values and not participate in evil systems, and more importantly, participate and support those who are actually aligned with your values, it's going to take time. It's going to take effort. It might take changing some of your habits. So so CryptPad is another tool that I use. So that was privacytools.io, libertytools.io, nomooregoogle.com, takebackourtech.org, abovephone.com, and then CryptPad if you want to look them up. And this is a little bit of this exit and build idea. We talked about money, food, technology. I go further in this book. And also I want to mention that I have a free 45-day challenge called the Exit and Build 45-day challenge. You can go to theconsciousresistance.com/EXB. I actually did this last September leading up to the US election. And my idea was this was 7 weeks long. So you watch the first one and there's a little bit of homework. We talk about what are the problems with money? What are the solutions? Hey, here's some ideas to try in the next week. And you take it bit by bit, and you start seeing how this can work holistically in different areas of your life. And it's my belief if you take that challenge seriously and you actually do some of the homework and test it out and go visit a farmer's market and try to meet more people, by the end of that, you're going to see the value in taking these concrete steps. You're no longer just like watching podcasts, talking abstractly, like, yeah, I believe in freedom. It's somewhere over there. And one day I'm going to live it. No, you're actually like choosing to like, this is what I'm going to fucking embody. This is what I'm going to be. And to me, that's that synchronicity, that synergy that I was talking about earlier between natural law and exit and build. Like exit and build is just taking the natural law concept and moving from just being a philosophical idea to one that you live. That's like when you're living natural law in your actions on a day-to-day basis. And that's really, to me, what matters more than anything, because things are getting kind of rough out there, and I don't suspect that they're going to immediately just reverse course. I am sometimes of the belief that there's no stopping this machine that is being built, and that the best we can do is to survive outside of it. That's why I talk about opting out and exiting building, because to me, it's not just about changing our values, but it's also about building these counter or parallel institutions that Samuel Konkin was talking about so long. We need alternative systems to everything that they are trying to co-opt and take over. I don't know what it looks like. I think it's going to take time. I think it's also a generational change, which is why to me, it's like, if we don't start now, then who else is going to? We need to lay the foundation now. So maybe by time that seventh generation does arrive, what we fought for and built, even if we don't live to see it in our day, it's there and it exists. But if we don't even start now, if we don't even make the effort, then I don't think it's going to happen. We are the ones we've been waiting for. There's no X-Men or Avengers coming to save the day. It's us. Like, this is it. If you're awake and you're paying attention, if you are living and breathing right now, I nominate you. Whether you like it or not, it's up to us. And so we each have gifts and things to offer, and it's time for us to step up. It's time for us to share that. And so I really do appreciate the opportunity to share my ideas. Again, the book is called How to Opt Out of the Technocratic State. You can download it for free at theconsciousresistance.com/how-to. There's an audio book there as well. And the challenge is theconsciousresistance.com/EXB. I want to just share a couple of closing thoughts and then wrap up. And again, thanks to everybody who's organized Soundpath and really made this wonderful effort to communicate so many important ideas and bring together music and conscious thinking and I think maybe some deeper conversations, some hard conversations that need to happen if we actually want to see the change we want to see in the world. So what I'd like to share in closing is just the positive affirmation that I tend to end all my videos with and that I do at the end of my talks. It's something that came to me in that period I described earlier when I was locked up at a young age, and I started doing a lot of my healing work and really just had to make it through what you might call the dark night of the soul. And so in that time, this phrase came to me, and if you resonate with it at home or in here, feel free to repeat after me. I am powerful. I am beautiful. And I am free. Thank you guys so much for tuning in. I appreciate you watching. My name is Derrick Broze. You can find me at theconsciousresistance.com. And I think we're going to be right back.
Since 2012, the Conscious Resistance Network has been an independent media organization focused on empowering individuals through education, philosophy, health, and community organizing. We work to create a world where corporate and state power do not rule over the lives of free human beings. Our motto is leading by example and helping others in their pursuit of freedom. Visit theconsciousresistance.com to find our articles, documentaries, interviews, podcasts, books, and more. Remember, you are powerful, you are beautiful, and you are free.